A lot of people have a strange internal rule of, if I start a book, I must finish it. Maybe this is one of the things you picked up in school, which is not useful. And it basically makes reading harder and less pleasant, right? Because then you associate it with this, I have this chore, I have to read this garbage book that I don't enjoy. Learning is one of the greatest things you can do with your time. It should be enjoyable. It should be exciting to learn and to have the opportunity to learn a lot about a topic you're interested in. And if a book is just boring you and not adding anything and is not well written, find a better book. On the Icario team, we do this thing that we call 3 books deep, which is basically you read 3 books on one topic that you're interested in, and then you give a presentation to the rest of the team telling them what you learned from these 3 books. Now, why 3 books? The first thing is that I think just reading in general is such a reliable way to upgrade your mind. It's one of these things where if nothing else, you should be doing it just because most people don't do it. And it gives you such a competitive advantage. It's such a clear thing to see, and I've seen this with many people that I have kind of gotten into a reading habit that they didn't have as strongly before they started working with me or before they met me. And you can just see such a reliable upgrade of the way someone thinks and just the depth of knowledge that someone has and the way they speak and the way they can argue. Like the before and after of having a reading habit is really remarkable. Most of our content consumption these days is short form content, stuff you can scroll through, right? That's what most people spend hours and hours every day consuming. And then that's closely followed by just entertainment content, right? We like to watch shows and movies and stuff like that. And you can really see this in the numbers. If we talk about, a smash hit Netflix show or movie or something like that, we're talking about millions upon millions, maybe tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of views on this thing. We're talking about a best-selling book. Books get on bestseller lists with like tens of thousands of copies sold, as far as I know. And if a book sells, 1 million copies, that is out of this world smash hit success. So you can see in these numbers where most people spend most of their attention. And there's just so much value in books. It is mind-boggling that you can buy essentially the culmination of someone's entire life. Everything they've learned over a long career, and they spent years and years studying stuff and so on. It's like boiled down into a thing that you can read through in a few hours, and it costs like $10 or something. It's absolutely like the value you get for the price you pay. It makes no sense really that this is even possible, right? And yeah, so basically everybody should read, or in a way, that's almost the wrong way to say it, right? Everybody should read, yeah, it would probably be good, but you should read because most people don't read. And let's be honest, right? It's good to have a leg up on other people. It's good to have a competitive advantage. Reading as a habit gives you that. So, okay, that's the basis. That's why I try to get people to read in general. I try to get people who work for me to read, and in general, I try not to be too annoying about it, but I do try to kind of nudge people towards a reading habit, just because, like I said, it's so skewed. The cost of it is so low. The time investment is relatively low compared to the value you get. It's just insane not to do this. And 3 books deep is just taking that even further. So there are a couple of ideas here, and you can implement this and you can try this out, where it's basically an approach to reading that helps you get even more out of it, and it gives you a further competitive advantage even over people who have a reading habit. So the basic idea is what I've already said. You pick a topic that you're interested in, and instead of reading 1 book on that topic, you read 3 books on that topic, and you generally read them in a row, one after the other. There's basically some ways to do this wrong, and there's some ways to do this that really help you get the most out of it. So here are 3 rules for getting the most out of doing 3 books deep. The first rule is to make sure you pick 3 books that are not all within the same bubble, because it is possible to read 3 books on a topic without really getting a lot of depth or breadth of knowledge out of that. And to give a simple example of this, let's say you're interested in nutrition, and maybe your friend has told you about the paleo diet or something like that, and you read a book about the paleo diet, and then you read another book about the paleo diet, and you read a third book about the paleo diet. And each book is written by someone who has built a career around the paleo diet, and they sell the paleo supplements and the paleo books and the paleo courses and so on. Every source that you're getting information from is invested in telling you, hey, the paleo diet is amazing. And this can be like maybe a pleasant experience where like, wow, I'm a genius. Right? I chose the paleo diet, and I read this book which told me this is the best thing you can possibly do. You should eat exactly like this, and here are some supplements you can buy on my website. And then I read the second book, and it's like, yeah, totally, the paleo diet is the best thing ever. And the third book said the same thing. Oh my God, I'm so smart, right? But the problem is, if you're interested in actually learning about nutrition, about how the human body works and about how to be healthier and so on, then reading 3 books that are in that tight bubble is not going to actually help you that much. On the other hand, the other extreme would be that you essentially read books that disagree with each other. So you maybe read a book about why a plant-based, fully vegan diet is the best thing you can do. And then you read another one about why keto, mostly meat diet is the best thing you can do. And then maybe you read a third one that is, something in between, or a third one that is about food and the microbiome or something like that. And think about, even though these are all 3 all about nutrition as well, they're all on the same topic, but think about how much more of an understanding of what's going on you will get from seeing these different perspectives on the same topic. It's a good practice to make sure that at least one of the books out of those 3 is kind of a counterpoint to something you've read, or is something that's outside of your worldview in some way. To give you another example here, apart from diet, I've read loads and loads of business books and books about the economy and so on, and most of these have a very pro-capitalist stance. And as an entrepreneur, I'm essentially an active capitalist, right? So I'm generally in a pro-capitalist bubble. To make sure that I'm not just stuck in this little bubble, I've also read books like The Myth of Capitalism by Jonathan Tepper. And I've also read books by Douglas Rushkoff, which are also generally really pointing out like problems with the capitalist system, problems with too much power in corporations and so on. It's not that I have to agree with everything that anyone says, which is also something that we have to get over, right? If you want to get more out of books, you shouldn't mind reading something that you disagree with and reading from an author who you don't share a worldview with. This is actually something that's very constructive. So that's the basic idea, right? Make sure that the books you read are not all in the same bubble. Make sure that you read a counterpoint, a counter argument. And in general, don't abandon a book because it doesn't fit your existing worldview. If you only read things that fit your existing worldview, you're really narrowing your ability to gain a new perspective and actually increase your knowledge and learn something. Another example of this that stands out to me is that in self-help, if you're generally interested in personal development, self-help, whatever you want to call it, there is a huge array of material, including books, that are all inside this bubble of kind of positive thinking, manifestation, new age spirituality, where again you can read book after book after book that just confirms the same kind of idea. And what you'd miss out on if you do that is extreme deep value you can get from learning about things like shadow work, from learning about things from a more scientific perspective, maybe learning something about, cognitive behavioral psychology or something like that. It's not that one is better than the other. I think you can also be stuck in the science-only bubble and miss out on some really valuable stuff. And I think it's really interesting to read something about how to live a better life from, let's say, the perspective of positive psychology, very science-based, amazing value to be found there. But then also learn about something that is maybe totally on the other side. Like I've read books about plant medicine written by traditional shamans. And as you can imagine, as someone who grew up in a Western culture, kind of secular beliefs and so on, most of the things that a shaman believes about the world to be true, the way they see the world, most of these things are things I don't agree with. They don't fit my existing worldview. But getting that perspective is still really valuable. And then you also have interesting characters like Gabor Mate, who seems to be kind of living in between those worlds a little bit, or he's not completely tied to just talking about things that have been scientifically proven. He brings in his own experience and like a slightly spiritual side. And again, this is what I mean by making sure you're not in one bubble. Like there's such richness in stepping out of a bubble. And what's also important is to be aware of that, right? To be aware of, are you actually currently stuck in a bubble? Do you think that you're reading widely, but actually you're just feeding yourself confirmation bias? Rule number 2 for going 3 books deep is to make sure that you go wide enough. So even though we're going 3 books deep on one topic, you can make a mistake of reading things that are essentially too similar. Now, maybe this sounds like the first rule I talked about, but here's an important difference. Let's say you're interested in learning about habits, and you just go to Amazon, you type in habits, and you buy the first 3 books that are listed, like the most popular ones that come back. It's quite likely that maybe they're in the same bubble, maybe they're not, but like topically and in what they teach you and how they teach you, it's quite likely that they're basically too similar, and you'll be reading the same stuff over and over again. So for example, on the topic of habits, you'll probably find Atomic Habits by James Clear, you'll find The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, and you'll maybe find Tiny Habits by B.J. Fogg, and you decide to read those 3 books. All of these 3 books are good books on the topic of habit, but they all come from a similar angle, and they're all basically, here's how to practically implement habit building in your life. And again, you might be just retreading the same ground over and over again. So a better way to pick 3 books is to try and come at the same topic from different angles. For example, you might choose Atomic Habits by James Clear as the practical self-help perspective of how to implement habits in your life. And then read a book like Good Habits, Bad Habits by Wendy Wood, which is much more about the theoretical side, understanding the actual, like what happens in the brain when habits are formed, understanding more of the underlying mechanics of this thing. And then you might read a book like Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss, which will just give you loads and loads of examples of various people in various fields, loads of like highly successful people, the kinds of things they do, the kinds of habits they have. And it can just give you examples and inspiration. And that's what I mean by this is not the same as whether the books are in the same bubble or not. This is more about what kind of thing are you learning about habits? Are you just learning about, here are the basics about habits, here's how to implement it 3 times over? Or are you learning some practical, some theory, and some examples and inspiration? Although I also have to say, like, I can simplify it like this and say, one book is practice, one book is theory, one book is inspiration. But really the value you get out of reading 3 books like this with 3 different perspectives like this goes way beyond that. Let me just be clear about that, right? I don't want to oversimplify here. But that's just another thing to take into consideration when you pick 3 books. So first, make sure they're not all in the same bubble of worldview, of beliefs. And secondly, make sure they're not all essentially just coming at the same topic from the same perspective with the same goal in mind. To give a couple more examples of the same kind of thing, let's go to the nutrition example again. You want to learn about nutrition. Well, one way to pick 3 books well is you might read one book that's just about generally, healthy nutrition, one book about nutrition for professional athletes, so like performance nutrition, and one book that is more concerned with longevity. And again, that will just give you a much deeper understanding, and you might, as you always will, when you read 3 books on the same topic, you'll probably revisit some of the same topics, you'll probably retread some of the same ground, but you really deepen your learning when you see one person say, well, okay, for performance, here's what you need to know about this protein, and another author say, well, for longevity, here's what you need to know about this protein. Like, that makes a huge difference. And to give one final practical example, I recently wanted to learn more about how money works, and I read a book about markets, so like the stock market, how does that work? I read a book about the economy on a wider scale, how do economies work? And then a book with a historical perspective like The Ascent of Money, or even something like Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, which gives you a very wide perspective of what is this money thing? How does it even come about? How do humans come to using something like money? So that's an example of going really wide on 3 topics that are still about the same thing. It's basically what is money and how does it work, right? that's also up to you to decide, like, do you want to go super wide, right, all the way from something specific to a historical perspective, or do you want to have like a tighter cluster like the nutrition example I gave before? But that's just something to be aware of as you pick the 3 books. And then rule number 3 is don't force yourself to read bad books, or don't force yourself to finish bad books, more specifically. So one of the things that happens when you start reading like this is it raises the bar. It raises your expectations. If you read a good book on a topic and you read another good book on a topic, now you've already leveled up your knowledge. And, if one of the books was really good, by comparison, many other books on the same topic will be bad and will be not worth your time. So this can often happen, especially when you start your second or third book. It can often happen that you just realize, well, this is not teaching me anything new, or maybe it's just like it's poorly researched or poorly put together compared to what I read before. Like I said, it raises your standards. Reading all these books raises your standards. And don't force yourself to finish a book just because you bought it and because you started it. Only finish a book if it's good. Now, like I said before, don't abandon a book because it challenges your worldview. That's a good thing. Like if it's a well-written book, a well-put-together book that challenges your worldview, great, keep reading. But the truth is, right, Sturgeon's law, 90% of everything is crap. The same applies to books. There are a lot of crap books. There are a lot of books that are just not worth reading. There are books that are padded out with all kinds of fluff. There are books that are written by people who don't actually know what they're talking about, and so on. And when you come across a book like this, it's better to abandon it and read a better book instead of it than to simply force yourself to keep reading. Learning is one of the greatest things you can do with your time. It should be enjoyable. It should be exciting to learn and to have the opportunity to learn a lot about a topic you're interested in. And if a book is just boring you and not adding anything and is not well written, find a better book. A few notes about how to learn the most when you do this, how to retain more of this information, make more of it. So the first thing is what we've basically already covered. By selecting the books well, you give yourself this kind of wide array of knowledge and perspectives on a single topic. So it's in a way deep and wide at the same time. And this helps tremendously with learning and retention. Because learning is really all about making connections between ideas. If you have a new idea, a new piece of information will only stick in your brain if you can connect it to other things that you already know and other things you've already learned. And this is why learning more about a topic is actually easier than learning very few things about a topic. So as you read 3 books, you will revisit the same topic from different perspectives, revisit the same ideas, and it gives you many more opportunities to interconnect these ideas. And it is especially powerful when you have this, this is what the first 2 rules are for, right? When you make sure that you cover a topic in a good way, it's not too tightly bundled, not all in one bubble. What happens is that you have this transfer of knowledge effect, where you are making combinations in your brain from stuff that isn't explicitly written down on the page. But as you're reading it, this reminds me of that other thing that I read over there. That creates a connection in your brain. And these connections that you form yourself, the ideas that you come up with by yourself as you're reading, these will stick in your mind much more. Right? It's much easier to remember something that you came up with than to remember something that you read. So a better learning effect and an easier learning effect is already built into doing 3 books deep. Reading like this also leads you to come up with essentially your own original and creative ideas. You will have things to say about this topic that weren't written in any of the 3 books. And not only is this genuinely an interesting experience, but it's also something, again, that can give you a competitive advantage, right? Where you're not just someone who can regurgitate stuff that someone else already said, but you can actually put information together and come up with original ideas and creative solutions. To take this even further, or if you want to deepen your learning, right at the beginning I mentioned that what we do in the Icario team is you read the 3 books and then you give a presentation to the team about what you learned. And this is the easiest way, or the most effective way, certainly, to learn more deeply is to explain what you learned to someone else. This is also known as the Feynman method, named after Richard Feynman, who basically said that's how you find out if you know something or not, right? If you know something, if you truly know something, you can explain it to someone in simple terms. And in the attempt to do that, if you realize that you can't explain it, then there's something you yourself don't know yet. So this is one of the best ways to deepen your learning, is you read the books and then you explain what you learned to someone else. The life hack here of how to do this is to form your own book club, right? We basically have a book club in the Etheridge team where we do this. And just like we talked about in the 100 Days of Gym video, it's often just way easier to do things with other people than to do them alone. And if you're interested in leveling up your mind and learning more and gaining this advantage, I bet there are people around you who would like to do the same. And it's just that nobody has taken the first step. And if you make the offer, if you say, hey, let's start a book club, let's do this, you will find people who are happy to join. So that is 3 books deep. This is the best way to level up your mind via reading that I have discovered so far. If you're interested in doing this, to make this easier for you, we've put together a list of some 3-book recommendations on different topics, okay? And you can find that in the Etheridge community. We'll link to that below. It's completely free. You can go there and just see some, as a starting point, some topics and 3 books that we've already curated for you that make a good combination. That is a good starting point. So check that out. And you can maybe also find some other people to join in your book club in the Etheridge community.